Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bleav in Bengals. I'm Solomon Wilcots, and he is our Bleav in Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, look, great to have you on, by the way, but I'm returning back from Super Bowl 59, where I spent the week in New Orleans. Not a bad state, by the way. Great food. Wish the football was as good on Super Bowl Sunday, but there were some tales. And here's where I'm going with this. Defense does win championships. It's no longer a cliche. I'm going to give my thoughts on why I still believe that. But based on what we saw in this game, why should you believe that?
What I believe is that in the NFL these days, with a quarterback as talented as Patrick Mahomes, who, yes, had a bad game, but the goal of defensive football is you're not going to win every down in a league that just favors offenses now with its rules and with the positions players are playing of so many different things. Your goal should be, can we create 5 negative splash explosive plays, sacks, turnovers, behind the sticks tackles, etc. And it turned out the Eagles had 5 of them on their first 5 third downs. And of course, 5 straight or a bunch of straight 3 and outs by the Chiefs. And that's how you shut out Patrick Mahomes in the first half. But you look at where those were coming from. Dominant pass rush. Cooper DeJean, a nickel corner who has safety instincts. They were coming because you had fast corners like Quinion Mitchell being able to take away the deep ball, because you had versatile defensive backs, because you had really hard hitters and sound tacklers. To me, it wasn't just even about just the defensive line. It was every unit of that defense. Zach Bond and his interception was ready to make something negative happen for the Chiefs. They were being the active aggressor in this matchup, and that's how they created those explosive plays.
Yeah, think about it. Vic Fangio deserves a lot of credit, the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, that I think he designed a masterpiece in terms of his game plan and how to attack Patrick Mahomes. I think he went back and watched what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and that defense did. They're the only team to, prior to Super Bowl 59, to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in a Super Bowl. And what did they do? It was all about getting that bull rush and pushing the pocket in the face of Patrick Mahomes. Up until Super Bowl 59, on Super Bowl Sunday, Vic Fangio was 0-8 in his previous 8 games when he's coached the defense that was playing against Patrick Mahomes. So he learned something. And he also had the advantage by having big, strong, athletic defensive linemen like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Josh Sweat. And Milton Williams was phenomenal as an interior rusher as well. They didn't blitz once. They gave the appearance that they might bring a few, but they never rushed more than 4 and finished the game with 6 sacks, 3 turnovers, most of that coming because of the relentless pressure. Mahomes looked jittery. He looked hurried. He looked like he was unnerved. And even when he did have time, he hurried his throws. I've never seen a game when Mahomes looked like this, where he looked average, Charlie. And that's why I'm saying that defense wins championships, because the best defenses know that if you can just throw off the timing of the opposing quarterback, and that the quarterback isn't some superhero. He needs everybody else's help in order to look good trying to win football games. I don't care who you are, whether if you're Pat Mahomes or Dan Marino. If you disrupt the comfort that the quarterback has standing in the pocket, he's going to find it hard to be successful.
I mean, it's a matchups league, and certainly the quarterback's the most positioned in the sport by far, but when you look at like breakdown, what were the matchups of this game? Philly's defense versus Kansas City's offense. With Travis Kelce being the guy he is right now, Kansas City didn't have a single other matchup what they could win. Like, what lineman did they know would win his one-on-one? Which skill position guy did they know would get open? Which running back did they know would break a tackle? It's funny too, like the Chiefs offense was terrible. It made me think, how the heck did the Bengals get a single first down against this Eagles offense when they played each other? But they were generating matchups. Jamar Chase versus the slot corner, who was Avonte Maddox at the time. Mike Gesicki had the advantage against Reed Blankenship. Like, they had matchups they knew they could win, and they were right. Kansas City had Mahomes, who can do anything, but you need a matchup that you can count on too. Andy Reid didn't give Mahomes that. You know, Brett Veach, the Chiefs GM, didn't assemble a roster that had enough of those matchup advantages because of some I don't want to call misses, but missteps they've had in the draft or free agency or through trades. And, as a result, the Eagles were just winning 10 out of 11 spots. And it can't be
Yeah.
one quarterback against 11 guys on defense.
Yeah, I think it was clear the Eagles had the better roster. I think we all knew that going in, but we kind of gave the Chiefs the edge because they're playing with house money. Andy Reid is the all-time winningest coach for both of these franchises, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. And Pat Mahomes was the proven quarterback. But now, as we look back on both Super Bowls that were played between these two teams in 2 of the last 3 years, Super Bowl 57 and Super Bowl 59, Jalen Hurts outplayed Pat Mahomes in both of those games. He threw for 300 yards last time they played and rushed for 75 yards in this Super Bowl and threw for right around 250. And he was almost flawless with the exception of the one interception that he had. But yes, I look at the defense. I look at the corners, Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell, one of the top rookie cornerbacks of this year's draft class. They had the advantage. They weren't worried about any of the wide receivers. Even the great DeAndre Hopkins could not shake loose well enough. Travis Kelce couldn't get open well enough. And so I thought defensively, with Zach Bond manning the middle of that defense, the Eagles had the upper hand. And offensively, with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, and then you throw Saquon Barkley in the mix, they had the advantages at just about every single position, with the exception of head coach and the quarterback. And we know that the Kansas City Chiefs had won 17 straight games when the score was decided by one score or less. Well, guess what? The Eagles said, we're not going to let it come down to that. They came out smoking. They knew they needed to widen the lead and not allow it to be a close game. I was told they wanted to do two things: avoid the one score lead or Mahomes having the ball last, but they also wanted to avoid the refs weighing and factoring in on the outcome of this game.
When you look at it from an Eagles perspective, like we talked about the defense, yes, that defensive line dominated the trenches against Kansas City's offensive line. But look then at what Philly's offense did against Kansas City's defense. And well, that to me was about skill players. It was a Kansas City defense that did an unbelievable job against Saquon Barkley and clearly was throwing a lot of resources there. But look at the big plays. They set up the first touchdown. Kansas City blitzes. Hurts reads it. His number 3 receiver, Jahan Dotson, who I wasn't, a big believer in, an incredible stop and go route. He wins one-on-one. He shreds, I believe, Jalen Watson. And a skill guy makes a play to get down to the 1. You look at how they set up their next field goal to take a 10-0 lead. You have A.J. Brown against Trent McDuffie, 2 star players. A.J. Brown wins that matchup. And then, you look after halftime, Devontae Smith on that play action deep ball. He wins. You had these winners that consistently created opportunities. Add on top of that, Jalen Hurts is scrambling, which is what he did best. Another example of just playmaking that goes beyond the X's and O's. Like that sort of star power too. Yes, you need to win in the trenches. It gives you an edge to win in the trenches. But how Philly's offense did it with this game was really with its playmaking talent.
First round picks across the board at 3 wide receiver positions for the Eagles. We know A.J. Brown was a first round pick coming out of Ole Miss, as well as Devontae Smith, a former Alabama Crimson Tide, was a phenomenal wide receiver during his tenure there. But don't forget about Jahan Dotson, a former first round pick out of Penn State for the Washington Commanders, who the Eagles traded to get him, right, just before the start of training camp. The Commanders were going in a different direction with their new coaching staff, and they end up with Jahan Dotson. And guess what? He pays off in the biggest game of the year for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I want to transition now to do sort of a Bengals breakdown. As we get close to heading into free agency and towards the draft, we get to stop down, Charlie, and talk about this Cincinnati Bengals team, the roster as it is currently constructed. I want to start with talking about Joe Burrow, because I spoke with him on my SiriusXM NFL radio show, The Opening Drive, and he clearly admitted that he's willing to do whatever it takes to keep the band together. And when I say the band, I think he's speaking specifically about himself, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. I'm not so sure that he's talking about all the guys on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, let's face it, he's only one man. He can only do one thing. And we ought to be realistic about what that give back or the restructuring looks like. But the fact that he is willing to do that says what to you?
Burrow continues to take more ownership. I thought that was kind of the story of the 2024 season, or maybe the
Yeah.
number two story behind the bad defense. It's,
Yeah.
heading into 2024, all right, you lose DJ Reader, you lose Joe Mixon, you lose Tyler Boyd. You've lost Jesse Bates the year before. I don't want to call it a leadership void, but the guys that Burrow looked up to when he entered the league were gone. Burrow's
Gone.
now one of the
Yeah.
longest tenured Bengals, and it's all of a sudden on his shoulders, kind of to be the
Yeah.
franchise in that way, and not necessarily defer, but take ownership. And we saw that as early as OTAs, when it felt like he was the one running practice at times, coaching up some of the young receivers. And that carried on in the locker room. I can tell you that for a fact. That carried on behind the scenes. I can tell you that for a fact. Conversations with people all throughout the building. Joe Burrow is playing a very, very prominent role in it all. And, another year under his belt, another year of, veterans out the door and new guys coming in. Burrow's importance and his central nature in that dynamic in the organization will just grow every year. And, here we are entering another year with Burrow saying even more.
Cincinnati Bengals have $46 million over the cap. They have a lot of money available to not only sign their own players, but maybe even acquire a couple of players in free agency. But I want to start with, because I think they have to really focus on, let's try to keep our own, particularly the best players. Trey Hendrickson is one of those players. In a prove-it year, right? He went out and led the league in sacks with 17 and a half in back-to-back seasons. I spoke with him on Radio Row at the Super Bowl in New Orleans. He came on the show with me, and I can tell you right now, he was very humble. He's very, I think, he's not trying to, I should say, rattle the sabers. Okay, he's not trying to, upset the apple cart, if I could say so. But when he is trying to be heard, and what he said is, look, I have a family. I can't play this game forever. He's not looking to come back and play another year on the current contract. And while these weren't his words, this was his sentiment that he's either going to get paid, or he's going to get a new contract, or he wants to be traded. And that's been very clear. And he's doing it as being as humble as he possibly can, being as much of a team guy as he possibly can. You and I both know, I think he proved it in 2024 when he said, look, we have a chance to win a Super Bowl. And even though he wanted a new contract, he bit his tongue and he went to work. And this year, you and I both know he wants things to end differently.
Trey's a guy who has done it the right way. Who's a great practice player, who's a high motor player with a lot of hustle and a lot of intangibles. And those are the kind of guys you'd like to reward when you look at the tough decisions that the Bengals are facing. Either they have to be very almost proactive and aggressive in structuring the contract in a very specific way that gives them flexibility now to do all that they have to do, and also some flexibility to maybe prepare themselves for a drop off that, not saying anything about Trey, but the drop off that happens to any, except for a very select handful of edge rushers in their mid 30s. So that's something the Bengals have to keep in mind. Something they have to keep in mind is how in the biggest moments of the season, Hendrickson wasn't pressuring the quarterback. And in blowouts, Hendrickson was racking up sacks and pressures in the stats that made him, frankly, the All-Pro this season. So these are things they'll have to consider. You want to continue to build around guys like Hendrickson, but you also want to build a defense that, you have a new coordinator coming in. You want to kind of overhaul the unit and become something else. I like the idea of kind of having a young defense grow together. And with a young defense, there's maybe a little less room for a 30-year-old and a little more room to maybe replace him with some of the assets that you get in a Hendrickson trade.
Give me something on Jamar Chase, because he had a prove-it year, right? Playing on the fourth and final year of his rookie contract. All he did was go out and win the Triple Crown and led the league in every statistical category that you want, at least the most important three for the wide receiver: receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And now they had already used the fifth-year option on him entering the 2024 season, when you have to make that designation. So right now he's set to play under the fifth-year option, but they could also sign him to a long-term deal. What do you see happening here with Jamar Chase?
Yeah, the deal will get done, but it's just kind of about the timing and the optics and the impact that all of the
Yeah.
negotiations will certainly one way or another have, just on the way that this whole organization feels. Like, if you get this done now, even if you do cave into maybe Jamar wins the negotiation 60-40 as opposed to what you're offering 50-50, that would feel like a win for the Bengals. That would probably give them some extra cap flexibility with the way you would
Yeah.
structure that type of contract extension.
Mhm. Yeah.
Probably wouldn't hurt to get it done before you would then talk to T. Higgins, who then shares an agent with Jamar Chase and would be able to have a clear understanding of what the entire picture looks like from a cap and a contract and a team building perspective, knowing what T's signing up for. It would, one of the reasons the Bengals lost in week one is because Jamar didn't practice in training camp and the impact that had on what the package
Oh,
for him was and on how he was playing. Like,
yeah.
a huge, couldn't think more highly of Jamar as a player, but you want to avoid that. And so take a
Yeah.
little action in your own hands, figure out what you need to do because Jamar's a guy you need to get a deal done with, and just prevent any distractions that would come up by getting it done early.
Yeah, certainly there are huge distractions. I think it contributed to the Bengals' slow start last year. Can't say that about the other years, but certainly for 2024, let's face it, the front office not getting those deals done, it served as a huge impediment to this team's ability to get off to a fast start. I'm a guy that's big on morale and how that leads itself to great energy and great focus. I do think the lack of morale and all the talk of contracts. You had Trey Hendrickson sort of hanging and dangling in the wind, T. Higgins and Jamar. I think it served as enough distraction to sap that team of energy at the beginning of the season when they should be most energized. Let's talk about T. Higgins because now Adam Schefter of ESPN has reported at the time of this recording that the Cincinnati Bengals could use the franchise tag again on one T. Higgins. They could tag him and then either sign him to a new deal or they could tag him and then trade him. But by using the franchise tag, it keeps him from hitting the free agent market, much to the dismay of a lot of NFL teams out there who can't wait to gobble up T. Higgins. But by using the second franchise tag, it would guarantee him right around $26 million for the upcoming season. That's a high water mark. He might get more on the free agent market just by a skosh. How do you see the Bengals playing this out, considering they could use the franchise tag for a second time on T. Higgins?
Yeah, the T. Higgins debate has been had a million times. And there are people who try to knock T down. They say, invest in this position or, well, the injury history. And you can think of all the things you've heard negatively about T. Higgins. Man, I can't stress enough how much value T. Higgins has. Like, sure, for any
Yes.
knock you could think, T. Higgins is about to get paid significantly. I could see between 26 to 30 plus million
Yes.
dollars if a team like
Yep.
the Patriots wants to bring him in and go over the top and
Mm-hmm.
convince T to be their guy. Like, it's funny. I was, I've been listening to a lot of great, football radio shows and podcasts over the last couple of weeks. And a common exercise before the Super Bowl, kind of before the week heats up, is all right. All the teams that got eliminated, what do they need? Where do they need to go? And like it felt
Mm-hmm.
like every 3 out of every 4 teams were like they need a number one receiver, and that's where they
Yeah,
were at the end of it. Like the Chiefs need a number one receiver, the Bills
that's
need a
right.
number one receiver, the
Yeah.
Ravens need a number one receiver. The
Mm-hmm.
Rams will need to replace Cooper Kupp. I could keep going. The Commanders need another star pass catcher. The Packers
Mm-hmm.
are out here publicly saying they want a number one. So T. Higgins is going to have a lot of value, knowing that the Bengals have to be very proactive, whether it is a tag and then extension, a tag and then trade. I don't even think you can let this go out into free agency either,
No,
because
no.
T has that much value.
I'm going to give you some numbers just to kind of give you an idea why T. Higgins is worth the price of admission. He's worth the price of a second franchise tag that would pay him $26 million, guaranteed for the next upcoming season in 2025. During his 5-year career at the Cincinnati Bengals, he has an 88.7% what we call catchable contested catch radius or rating. In other words, when the passes are catchable, but yet he's still contested while the defensive back is standing right next to him, he has caught the ball when targeted 88% of the time. Now, that for a quarterback, that makes you really ecstatic. That's almost 90% of the time when he's covered, okay, and the ball is in a catchable position, he's the guy that comes down with it over the 5 years since he's been with the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think you got to keep that in mind. 113 explosive passes caught. That means 113 passes caught of a 15-yard variety. Okay? That's what's known as an explosive pass. Now, get this one. He's caught over his 5 years, 330 receptions during his 5-year career. Roughly 80%, 267 of them either went for a first down or a touchdown, Charlie. 80% first down, touchdown percentage. That in and of itself says this guy's the number one receiver. He's done it when Jamar was not on the field. He's done it when Jamar was double covered. He's done it when he was double covered, under every scenario. And oh, by the way, he's not a diva. The guy is phenomenal. He has proven that he's worth every single penny.
You talk about kind of the consistency, and that to me is the story of his season. Like, there's a stat efficiency that shows when you get targeted, what's the efficiency rate of the play. And real quick, what that means is if it's 2nd and 2, do you get the first down? If it's 1st and 10, do you get an efficient 6 yards? And there are stats that back all that stuff up. Higgins was the 3rd most efficient receiver in the NFL last year, behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin. And he was so efficient that I went through all of his, failed plays, the negative, not efficient plays. There were like 20, and like 7 of them were throws that weren't close, bad throws by Burrow. And so nothing Higgins could do there. And 7 of them were plays where Higgins and Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow and the whole stadium was saying Higgins should have gotten a pass interference. So those missed calls on T were like another 7 of those plays. So then there were like 6 plays all year where Higgins didn't make the catch. And that is a remarkable level of consistency. And then you look at how that showed up in winning moments, against the Broncos is the perfect example. In the moments that defined the season or should have defined the season when the Bengals needed a play, Higgins got the job done, and that deserves to be rewarded.
3 touchdowns in a game that they absolutely needed. Cincinnati Bengals got their season going by winning the last 5 games in the regular season. I asked Joe Burrow, when did the season kind of turn where he felt like this team was playing the way that he expected them to from the beginning? He said it was that play against the Dallas Cowboys where the partially blocked punt went past the line of scrimmage. It was poorly handled by the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cincinnati Bengals recovered it. He knew right then and there they were going to score. And then there was a Jamar Chase moment. They won the game. And that one play, that's right, one play of a game over. And from that moment on, they won every single game to close out the regular season. You never know when the team is going to turn to do the thing that we always expected. One last point. I want to ask you about some of the free agents. And what do you think happens? I'm going to name them, and then you go down the line and tell me, are they gone or do they come back somehow, some way? Mike Gesicki, expected to be an unrestricted free agent. B.J. Hill, who we all love. Mike Hilton, who we revere. Von Bell, Joseph Osai, Akeem Davis Gaither. For those 6 players, you say what?
Mike Gesicki is a guy the Bengals have to make a very competitive offer for, but when you look at kind of what we're talking about with paying T, you do need to take some flyers at specific positions because that'll be all you can afford. So Gesicki's a guy I think you'd love to bring back, but is he a want or a need will be an interesting conversation. I think the Bengals need to overhaul their defensive line. They just got nowhere near enough, and it'll take new pieces, specifically guys who maybe excel at one thing and can like platoon together to become a strong line and build together in the aggregate. So that impacts my thoughts on B.J. Hill and Joseph Osai. Mike Hilton, you're right. We revere Mike Hilton on this podcast. However, when you look at, like I was talking about earlier with Hendrickson, the idea of building a young defense, like I was talking about with the Eagles a bit ago, the value of playmaking, splash plays, negative plays in coverage from a cornerback like they got from Cooper DeJean, does what fits Al Golden's scheme and what this defense has to become rely on a guy who gives you more in coverage than Mike Hilton? That kind of impacts my thoughts on where I see Mike going. Keem Davis-Gaither's a favorite of Al Golden. Sure, you'd love to have him back in his role as a third linebacker, but more often than not, I mean, when you look at a defense that underperformed as much as it did, you probably should have a lot of new faces and start something different.
Yeah, for Al Golden, the Bengals' new defensive coordinator, it turns over right at the right time, right? He's not stuck with maybe players that he feel like he should be moving on from. He's going to have a lot of openings, a lot of positions where they're going to have to plug in someone different than what we've seen maybe over the last 3 or 4 years. It could even be at the Trey Hendrickson position. Let's face it, he's 31 years of age. He is under contract for another year. But I would be of the opinion that you want volunteers, not hostages. And look, he wants to take care of his family. And if you're not willing to compensate him at that level, then let's see if you can get something for him. Maybe there's some draft capital there to be gained. Charlie, great having you on the show. Great information per usual. We appreciate you joining us. Look, man, we're going to be going to the scouting combine here soon. We got lots to talk about this offseason. I'm going to look forward to having you as we talk about free agency, the upcoming draft, and a whole lot more right here on the Bleav in Bengal podcast. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next week.